So I'm gonna jump in here and just get started. Before I do, Andrew, can you just let me know if my video is okay and everything looks good?
You're good to go.
Okay. All right, everybody. So welcome to What the Bleep is Happening, the astrology of spring 2025. So we're gonna be spending most of our time here talking about an alignment between planets that reflects kind of the unfolding drama here on Earth, or the unfolding storyline here on Earth, both in the world around us and potentially in our own inner experience as well. So that alignment that we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about is called the Jupiter Saturn Neptune hard alignment. Hard alignment means that they're in what's called a tense angle with each other. Um, it's one of the most dominating transits this spring, so that's why we're going to spend some time on it. After that, we're going to go into a bit of an exploration of the transits that the United States is going through. And then, time willing, we're going to open up the discussion for questions. So don't take that as ominous that I said what the United States is going through, that something just fell behind me. Um, so yeah, there's many insights to be had, very helpful insights. So we're going to open up towards the end for questions, but what we're not going to do is we won't have time this time to be looking at personal charts and answering questions about how this transit or the transits that are going on right now are going to affect you personally. But for that, I have scheduled another free Zoom on Thursday of next week. That's March 20th. It's at 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. 5 p.m. PST, Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that one is specifically for the purpose of seeing how the Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune alignment is going to transit your particular birth charts. So make sure to show up with your curiosity and your birth data on hand. And I'm actually going to post the link for that in the chat. Go ahead and do that. So those who are interested can sign up for that. Okay, so that's here in the chat. And then also, because the Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune alignment we're going to be talking about today can be potentially a very challenging transit. I'm going to be holding something called the Paradigm Shift Integration Circle from April through May. That's basically an online astrological support group that includes 8 group calls and also a full in-depth one-on-one astrology reading with me. And the group calls are there so that we can help understand week by week what this transit is, what the lessons are of this transit that's trying to show you in your life, so you can kind of more quickly dial into what strengths it wants to summon from you. So that's called the Paradigm Shift Integration Circle. I'm actually going to share my screen with you so you can see a bit of that. Let's do that. So the Paradigm Shift Integration Circle. Looks like this. So this is an 8-week group. Is everybody able to see that? This is an eight week kind of astrological support group, basically to help folks kind of make it through the tensest part of this alignment right now, and help kind of like use the insights of archetypal astrology to kind of guide you during that time, and at the same time also create a cool bonding experience with our little community that we're going to create, kind of band together and support each other and have fun at the same time. So previous paradigm shift integration circles, we've had some people mentioning their experiences. We've got this experience was life-changing, says Andrew. Wonderful class by a brilliant teacher and a wonderful group of kindred souls. Thank you so much for including a beginner, says Mara. Thanks for leading us in full and wonderful readings, James. The way you use readings as a tool for growth is beautiful. I appreciate the way you pulled us together for this, providing a safe container for each of us. Luke says, that was Elaine. Luke says, damn, I got my money's worth from this course. Alexa says, I love this group. So that's a paradigm shift integration circle happening in April and May during the kind of one of the more intense periods of this transit this year. So again, that's a support circle if you're really feeling it. All right. Let's get back to our topic at hand here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to share one more thing with you. One more cool little tidbit. In fact, let me share the link with the paradigm shift integration circle so you can learn more about that in the chat. And if you're watching the recording of this, all these links will be in the description. So there's the link for the paradigm shift integration circle. Come join us. It's going to be mind-blowing and also heart-opening. And then if you are curious what tense alignments you were born with, so we're going to be using a lot of examples of people born with the specific tense alignments we're talking about today. We're going to use examples of people that were born with it because they manifest through their lives qualities of that tension that we're all in the collective going to be experiencing. So they kind of leave us clues as to how to wrestle with this energy, how to reconcile this energy. If you're curious about what tense alignments you were born with, and you also want to see a fun list of other famous people born with those same tense alignments, you can click on this link here that I'm putting in the chat. Again, if you're watching the recording, you can find that in the description. And that's just a fun thing. You'll get an email report to you of the tense alignments you were born with. You can see other famous people born with those same tense alignments and how they dealt with it in their life and work. Okay, so let's dive in here. Let's begin looking at the Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune hard alignment. So technically, the alignment is what's called a conjunction between Saturn and Neptune, and that's taking place between Pisces and Aries. And so conjunction means that from our perspective, the two planets look as if they're almost on top of each other. So you can actually see Saturn in the night sky pretty well these days. It's pretty apparent, nice and bright. You need a pretty powerful telescope to see Neptune, so you wouldn't be able to see it. But if you could see it, you'd see that they're coming closer and closer as we go into the spring, and then they're going to be right on top of each other. And that's called a conjunction. And then those two planets are in a 90-degree angle to Jupiter, which is between the signs of Gemini and Cancer. And so that's what's called a hard alignment, hard angle that combines all those three together. So this is a super rich combination, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify it by breaking it down into the Saturn-Neptune combination and the Jupiter-Neptune combination. Okay, so let's begin by looking at the dates of the alignments. So using what's called the orbs of archetypal astrology. Archetypal astrology is the tradition that I'm in. And then an orb means like a wiggle room, how many degrees on either side before an angle becomes exact when that combination is active. So the Saturn, so an outer planet conjunction, a conjunction of planets that are far out, like Saturn and Neptune, it gives like a 15-degree orb in archetypal astrology. And that 15-degree orb between Saturn and Neptune began to take effect around March and April of 2024. So it was pretty wide at that point. It was a wide 15-degree orb. And now, a year later, essentially through April and May, that orb becomes very tight. It becomes really tight, and it becomes really tight for the rest of the summer. And that's why this period is the period of tension. And that's why I'm opening up the archetypal astrology support group that I mentioned that I posted in the chat for those months specifically. So even back then, even though the orb was wide between March and April of 2024, we saw the archetypal combination appear on the scene with gusto when that combination was joined by Mars. So it was Saturn and Neptune, and then Mars joined the combination. And we saw this rather large container ship hit the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, and that was really dramatic. Aside from the hard hit, which is emblematic of the Mars archetype, the forceful archetype of Mars, aside from that, we saw a structure collapse into water, and that's the Saturn Neptune combination that we're going to talk about today. That's a theme between Saturn and Neptune, the collapse of structures into water that we're going to be talking about. So also at that exact time, the musician Taylor Swift came out with her new album, her latest album, The Tortured Poets Department, and that was in April, I believe, early April. And as we're going to see today, poetry is a medium through which the archetype of Neptune is very much at home. Poetry can really convey the archetype of Neptune. And then not only that, the archetype of Neptune actually is, poetry itself is representative of the archetype of Neptune. And then the stuffiness associated with the word department and the suffering associated with the word torture are reflective of the archetype of Saturn. So we have the Tortured Poets Department. That was the name of the album that she released at that time. And at that time, she also came out with her first video from the album for the song Fortnight, which with its really like stark black and white tones, I don't know if any of you ever seen that. It's stark black and white tones. It kind of represents the aesthetic of the Saturn-Neptune combination. It captures it. That's an amazing thing about artists, is that they can actually like tune into the collective and through their art really evoke the archetypal tensions of that time. So if you haven't seen that video, I recommend checking it out. It really conveys kind of the aesthetic of what we're going through now with Saturn and Neptune. So the Jupiter-Neptune alignment, we're breaking it down, Saturn, Neptune, Jupiter, Neptune. The Jupiter-Neptune alignment began, again, with a wide orb last September, so 2024. And it's also heading into a very tight alignment, particularly this May and June. Okay, so what do these archetypal combinations reflect? So we're going to start off with the Saturn-Neptune combination. We're going to spend a fair amount of time on this one because it's so rich, and also because it's potentially very challenging. But the way it is with these archetypal combinations is, to the extent, exactly to the proportion that the combinations are tense and challenging, is to the proportion from which they can be rewarding and can kind of like summon our strengths. Okay, so let's talk about Saturn-Neptune combination. So Saturn is the planet that's bound by rings. The astrological archetype of Saturn is associated with that which limits and confines us. So we are limited by the constraints of reality. For instance, we are mortal. We're born and we die. We experience separation and loss. And Saturn is associated with all these limitations, as well as kind of like the fear and the heaviness that can anticipate, like that come with an encounter with these limitations of life, of reality and life, like loss, mortality. Within the larger deadline of mortality, we're also faced with so many like smaller deadlines, like when you go to school and you have to take tests and you have projects and you have timelines and deadlines to meet. You leave school and you have to pay bills, you have projects, you have work, you have schedules. There's so many smaller deadlines that kind of hem us into the responsibilities of reality. We have obligations, we have responsibilities. And Saturn is associated with all these realities of life and all the reality checks of life. Saturn is not just associated with that, it's actually associated with the structure of reality itself, such as things like time, space, gravity. All these are dimensions that limit us, but yet make reality real. So structures not only limit and constrain, but they also give form and shape to things. So those things can persist over time. And so like Saturn is associated with actual physical structures, like buildings, like your home. Your home may not extend forever, but it like if you just keep walking in one direction, you may hit a wall, but it limits us in a sense, but also it gives a shape to our life. There's other sorts of structures, like for instance, like the texts and the dogma and the like the rituals that make up those are the structures that make up something like a tradition and a religion. So those are structures too. Our very own skeleton is a sort of a structure. It allows us to bear the literal weight of reality, like gravity. We also have, so that's Saturnian. We also have the internal psychological structures that we impose upon ourselves, things like discipline, maturity. They allow us to bear the figurative weight of reality. So these are the strengths of Saturn. These are the strengths that Saturn elicits from us by bringing around all these reality checks, all these limitations, all these obligations and burdens that we have to face. The message of Saturn, the strength of Saturn, is it's asking us to summon from within us an internal structure of governance. So we have our own internal laws and discipline and inner authority that we obey. That's kind of like the positive Saturn, our own internal pragmatism, practicalness, maturity, the positive, the strengths of Saturn. So that's Saturn on one hand. On the other side, we have Neptune. So Neptune in Greco-Roman mythology was the god of the ocean. An astrological archetype of Neptune is associated with infinite planes that have no center, they have no boundary. They actually transcend the structures of dimensionality that are associated with Saturn. So these planes include things like dream realm, the imagination, like the sea of the collective imagination from which comes the collective unconscious, from which comes all the like images and themes that inform the stories and the mythologies of the world. That would be Neptunian too. The spirit realm and heaven, those would be considered Neptunian in that they transcend the Saturnian realm of like time and separation and loss. Perhaps maybe the ultimate Neptunian experience would be connecting with a divine unifying principle that is both everywhere and nowhere, that is transcendent of the distinctions and divisions of kind of Saturnian reality. It's an ever-present, subtle, cohesive, unifying, infinite principle. That would be kind of like a Neptunian experience, an ultimate Neptunian experience. So because Neptune is associated with these particular properties, it has like particular character traits. For instance, it has an affinity with the visioning capacity that inspires human action. So we all have like hopes and dreams. We all have a visioning capacity that inspires us to act, like that quote, without a vision the people perish. Like we need to have something that we're looking forward to, something that draws us forward. That comes from our visioning capacity, that gives birth to inspiration. So Neptune is associated with that. The boundlessness associated with Neptune gives it kind of links it up or gives it an association with self, like you could say a dissolved. The infinity of Neptune tends to want to dissolve whatever it touches. So our sense of self-centeredness getting dissolved. It's hard to have a sense of self-centeredness in a plane that's infinite, has no center and no boundaries. So for that reason, Neptune's associated with things like selfless service, devotion, and also Neptune's associated with actually things dissolving, like we talked about, like the actual like structures dissolving. Whatever other archetypes come in combination with it, there can be a dissolving action there. Neptune is associated with mirages and illusions. Like if we were to project divine perfection onto an object or onto a person, we would be projecting the Neptunian connection with something that transcends, that's infinite and transcends finitude onto something finite. So something that has a beginning and an end, like a person or an object. And that would be delusional. Unless it's like something like, I see the divine principle shining through this person. This person's a vehicle for it, or this object is a vehicle for it. But if we actually place that this thing itself is divine, in their kind of transient, ephemeral self, containing this divine unifying principle, then there's the action of mirages and illusions that Neptune is displaying for us. So let's look at some examples of these two when they join together, like they're doing now, and like they're doing more and more tightly as we're entering into the next several months. Before we do that, though, before we look at the examples of this combination, I just want to point out that because Neptune is evolved, because Neptune is associated with the visions and in dreams that inspire artists, and that inspire us all, you notice that many of the examples are quite bewitching. Even in their kind of like dark and heavy Saturnian aspect, they can have a kind of a beguiling, entrancing, bewitching quality that can be convincing, but we want to be aware that that's just the Neptunian imaginative capacity at play. So there's also the mirage quality there as well. Okay, so for our first example of Saturn and Neptune in combination, I'm going to choose someone who I consider to be one of the master Saturn-Neptune poets of the 20th century, and that's the musician James Hetfield, who's the frontman of the band Metallica. So Hetfield has this, the reason why I say that is because Hetfield has this uncanny ability to capture the essence of the Saturn-Neptune that in his birth chart, because he was born with it, in his poetic lyrics and in his musical compositions. So let's look at an example here. So in his song Enter Sandman by Metallica, we see the Neptunian realm of dreams taking on kind of like the fearful anticipation associated with Saturn. So Hetfield sings, "Say your prayers, little one. Don't forget, my son, to include everyone. I tuck you in, warm within, keep you free from sin, till the Sandman, he comes. Sleep with one eye open, gripping your pillow tight, exit light, enter night. Take my hand, we're off to Never Never Land. Something's wrong, shut the light. Heavy thoughts tonight, and they aren't of Snow White. Dreams of war, dreams of liars, dreams of dragon's fire, and all and of things that will bite. Sleep with one eye open, gripping your pillow tight. Exit light, enter night. Take my hand, we're off to Never Never Land." So in this example, we see the Never Never Land of Neptune, the dream realm of Neptune, suddenly a place that inspires Saturn's emotion of fear, fearful anticipation. And yet this example gives us what I feel is a positive lesson about the Saturn-Neptune combination, namely that the imaginative capacity of Neptune has become imbued with a heavy and scary Saturnian spin that can actually be revealed to be not based in actual reality. So what does that mean? That means that we are prone during a transit like this to project things as worse than they are. That's, again, that imaginative capacity, awaken, that dreaming capacity that can project a Saturnian hue that is worse than the actual reality dictates. So other artists that are born with a Saturn-Neptune combination like James Hetfield include the authors H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe. In his stories, H.P. Lovecraft often revisits themes in which supernatural powers warp the dimensions of physical structures. It's a very common theme in his work. So for instance, like in The Call of Cthulhu, one of the characters encounters a structure out in the middle of Neptunian ocean. So it's out in the middle of the ocean. It's very Neptunian. And that structure arises from the ocean, and it boasts angles and slopes that belong to a whole nother transcendent order of dimensionality altogether. The same theme pops up in Dreams in the Witch House, in which structures of buildings warp and lean in ways that defy the known laws of physics, the known laws of reality. So we can see kind of the Saturnian hard lines of structures beginning to get played upon by the Neptunian kind of illusionary extra dimensional sense. And then Edgar Allan Poe describes the very literal dissolving of structures in his story, The Fall of the House of Usher, in which the House of Usher, which is a structure, which is an actual house, literally collapses and dissolves into the Tarn Lake, as a body of water. So we can see there this Saturnian sense of structure dissolving into that Neptunian kind of water principle. And the dissolution of Saturnian structures can be an internal process, such as the dissolution of internal structures in our psyche, depending on where the transit is landing in your own personal birth chart. And that, I feel James Hetfield kind of touched upon that, because in the lyrics to Enter Sandman, the person is beginning to go into dreams, and then the structures that are the boundary between dream and reality begin to get blurred. And Saturn shows up in the dreams as this kind of like dreamy, scary reality. So that can be internal structures. It can also actually mean the literal dissolving and collapsing of external physical structures, such as the bridge collapse into the water in Baltimore that we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. The dissolving of the levees in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina is another example, breaking of the levees. That happened during another Saturn-Neptune hard alignment, the opposition. And yeah, we can see there this kind of dissolving of the boundaries. The levees kept the water out of New Orleans. The dissolving of the boundaries, they broke, and then the water inrushed into New Orleans. So interestingly, we can also see the opposite action of Saturnian structure and limitation acting upon the imaginative faculties of Neptune, creating a sort of delusional idealization of concrete religious structures and dogma. The Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges, he was born with Saturn, Neptune, in 10th alignment, and he demonstrates this really masterfully in a short story called The Gospel According to Mark, in which a remote and isolated community of people comes up with a delusional interpretation of the Bible that's so so flatly dogmatic, that they think that in order to be absolved of their sins, they actually have to go find somebody to crucify. So we can see here the different ways, like Saturn playing on Neptune, Neptune playing on Saturn, which brings us to the very core of the Saturn-Neptune combination, I feel. The deepest substrate of this combination, the human psyche, was discovered by Stanislav Grof and Richard Tarnas during the first wave of research into psychedelic-assisted healing in the West. And there's studies of systematic consciousness exploration utilizing psychedelic medicines. They observed in their study participants that it was fairly common that study participants would start reliving the memories of their own births. And they found that the Saturn-Neptune combination is specifically relevant and reflective of the transition between the first stage of birth and the second stage of birth. And these are known as basic perinatal matrices 1 and 2. And so the first basic perinatal matrix, the first stage of birth, is markedly Neptunian. The baby's in the womb of the mother. All physical processes are being taken care of by the body of the mother, so much so that there's no distinction between the baby and the mother. There's sort of not only is there a unity between the baby and the mother, but the baby has not yet been born into a reality of dimensional limitation. So that unity is kind of on a cosmic level. It's like an all-encompassing cosmic unity. And that's associated with the archetype of Neptune. And then the second basic perinatal matrix is remarkably Saturn in its character, in that during the second stage, the birth contractions have set in, the cervix has not yet opened. So the baby, previously unaware that it was all separate, that it was at all separate or distinct from the mother, is now quite unexpectedly experiencing a rejection from the very womb that it was conjoined with. And again, because the baby's not yet aware of the universe limited by dimensionality, the rejection can be experienced as like a cosmic rejection. on the same breadth of level that the cosmic unity was previously experienced. So suddenly the Neptunian dream of infinite boundlessness is occluded by this reality of separation, and yet a reality that is itself not bound by the limitations of reality. The transcendent quality of Neptune seems to paint a picture in which Saturn's reality of suffering is infinite. It's both without end and without purpose. Experiences that re-engage this layer of the memory and the psyche demonstrate some of the most difficult qualities of the Saturn-Neptune combination, some of the most difficult experiences in the human field. And perhaps there's no better way to demonstrate this than calling upon the Neptunian faculty of the artist's imagination once again. And for this, we're going to again return to James Hetfield, the frontman of the band Metallica. To my mind, one of the most evocative works of art to capture this level of human experience is the song One by Metallica. So this song narrates a story from the point of view of a soldier who's returned from war after a landmine not only has taken his arms and his legs, it's also taken his sight, his hearing, and his speech. So interestingly, the song is inspired by the 1939 novel Johnny Got His Gun, and then the subsequent movie, Johnny Got His Gun, both of which the novel was written by Dalton Trumbo and the movie was directed by Dalton Trumbo. Dalton Trumbo was born with Saturn-Neptune combination, just like James Hetfield was. And so James Hetfield sings the following. He says in the song One, I can't remember anything. Can't tell if this is true or dream. Deep down inside, I feel to scream. This terrible silence stops me. Hold my breath as I wish for death. Oh, please, God, wake me. Back in the womb, it's much too real. In pumps life that I must feel, but I can't look forward to reveal. Look to a time when I'll live. Fed through the tube that sticks in me, just like a wartime novelty, tied to machines that make me be. Cut this life from me. Hold my breath as I wish for death. Oh, please, God, wake me. So, we can really see the subconscious of the artists at play here, pulling upon this birth imagery, and also the Neptune Saturn interplay. Can't tell if this is true or dream. True, Saturn, dream, Neptune. Back in the womb, it's much too real. Again, back in the womb, Neptune, it's much too real, Saturn. So as evocative as the song One is, perhaps the scariest manifestation of the Saturn-Neptune combination is the prospect of living in a cosmos in which the Neptunian vision of heaven, of the transcendent, of the divine unitive principle behind all of life is occluded by a Saturn that is imbued with Neptunian infinitude, leaving us living a life in a cosmos that has no meaning, a cosmos that is an endless expanse of arbitrary meaninglessness. So when asked, what are humans for? The historian of particular note these days who wrote the book Sapiens, Yuval Noah Harari, who was also born with the Saturn-Neptune combination, when asked, what are humans for? He had this to say. He said, as far as we know, for nothing. And he says, there's no great cosmic drama that we have a role to play in it. Again, the universe kind of devoid of meaning, an endless play of arbitrary meaninglessness. So now that we've wandered deep into the challenge side of Saturn-Neptune, what are the strengths of Saturn-Neptune? And some of the strengths of Saturn-Neptune involve actually moving exactly beyond the words of Yuval Noah Harari. When life seems to be a pointless wash of suffering, we find within ourselves our own inner authority of Saturn to make our own meaning to life and to step up and take responsibility for others by engaging in Neptune's selfless service to help those who are suffering. So author W. Somerset Maugham, who was born with the Saturn-Neptune combination, who wrote the novel The Painted Veil, which has a particularly descriptive portrait of these nuns that moved to China during a cholera outbreak to help the people suffering from cholera. And when they get, the scene is the people are dying of cholera in droves, and the nuns are there to really just be with them, and stand by them and support them through their suffering. Um, Harriet Tubman, she was born with this combination, Saturn Neptune. And how many times did she put herself in danger to keep others free from captivity? Abraham Lincoln, he was born with this combination. And one of the most redeeming Saturn Neptune speeches, I feel, is the Gettysburg Address, in which Lincoln was asked to, basically the story is that Lincoln was asked to consecrate the ground upon which thousands died in battle. And he says these words. He says, "We cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. We cannot. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. From these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." And Abraham Lincoln can actually account himself one of those very honored dead who gave his life in the service of others. So my personal perspective on the strengths of the Saturn Neptune combination is that it gives us an opportunity for a different spiritualized take on reality, in which the perspective of the individual is considered. And the reason why I say that, why I focus on the individual, is because the mind is in its element when it can perceive the world around it through diversities and distinctions. Everyone is so different. We're all so different. We all live such varied lives. But if you want to know what exists in the heart of each and every one of us, then go within your own heart. And do this especially when you're suffering. And you will see that you are the archetypal person. You are the archetypal person. We all look out from the same eyes. So we may not be looking out from the same physical eyes. And the worlds that we see when we look out may appear vastly different, but the underlying program of humanity is the same. So it's through encountering the suffering of Saturn inside of ourselves that we can experience the transcendent Neptune. It allows us to comprehend that each one of us is all of humanity. So when you look out from your eyes at the world around you, you're looking at yourself, both in all your nobility and all your ignobility. And this is the hard reality of the transcendent truth within us. And with it comes a very Saturnian obligation that we are actually responsible for each other. That's what I feel is the strength of the Saturn-Neptune combination, what is on the other side of the Saturn-Neptune combination, the lesson, and the strength that it can summon from us. Okay, so good. We went into Saturn-Neptune. We went real deep. We encountered the breadth of Saturn-Neptune. We're going to look at Jupiter-Neptune here, which is a little bit more brief, and then we'll get into looking at the chart of the United States, the transits of the United States. That means like how these alignments line up in the chart of the United States, and kind of begin to open it up in a more discussion format. But first, let's look at the Jupiter-Neptune combination. So we'll kind of shake out the Saturn-Neptune combination. We're going to look at the Jupiter-Neptune combination. That's one half of what we're experiencing now. Again, they're a whole, but we're breaking it into parts. So the Jupiter-Neptune combination. This combination combines everything we've already learned about Neptune, right? The association with dreams, the association with imagination, the escape into fantasy, and a very real experience of the transcendent and unitive aspect of it. It combines those with the Jupiter archetype. So what's the Jupiter archetype? Jupiter is the largest planet. Jupiter, or Zeus, was the king of the gods in the Greco-Roman pantheon. And the astrological archetype of Jupiter is associated with growth, expansion, abundance, uplift, success, optimism. Very different than Saturn, right? Jupiter wants us to see the larger whole, the bigger picture, the larger cultural palette. It wants to incorporate seemingly disparate parts into grander, more cohesive wholes. So combining Neptune, the archetype of Neptune, with something that's so positively inflected as Jupiter it can sometimes be hard to see what the challenges could be, what the challenges of that combination could be. But all archetypal combinations have a potentially challenging characteristics, and it pays to become aware of them, because by becoming aware of them, we're more likely to kind of wrest the strengths from the combination. So, what are the challenging potentials in the Jupiter Neptune combination? Well, you could say that if when we combine the peaks of Jupiter, kind of the heights, the peaks of Jupiter with the sublime reveries associated with Neptune, it can reflect a tendency to seek escape into uplifting and ecstatic experiences, such as like the heights of intoxication, or even allowing oneself to get deluded by unrealistic visions of castles in the cloud seen through rose-colored glasses. There is that potential there to be aware of. So Roger Waters, who's a member of the band Pink Floyd, he was born with the Jupiter-Neptune alignment, and I feel that he captures kind of similar interplay pretty well in the song Comfortably Numb, in which he narrates, as far as I know, a supposedly true experience in which he was injected with some sort of drug to overcome the pain of an injury so that he could play a concert. And in the song Comfortably Numb, he sings, "There is no pain. You are receding, a distant ship, smoke on the horizon. You are only coming through in waves. Your lips move, but I can't hear what you're saying. When I was a child, I had a fever. My hands felt just like two balloons. Now I've got that fever once again. I cannot explain. You would not understand. This is not how I am. I have become comfortably numb." So the words comfortably numb reflect the escape away from reality into a place in which discomfort is masked by euphoria. Um, that's one potential there. In the song The Seeker by the band The Who, Roger Daltrey is the frontman of the band The Who, who's also born with the Jupiter-Neptune combination. He expresses the frustrating side of Jupiter Neptune's tendency to seek Jupiterian heights that are too Neptunianly subtle or elusive to actually reach. Again, there's that elusive mirage quality. So he sings, "I asked Bobby Dylan, I asked the Beatles, I asked Timothy Leary, but he couldn't help me either. They call me the seeker. I've been searching low and high. I won't get what I'm after till the day I die. Focusing nowhere, investigating miles. I'm a seeker. I'm a really desperate man." So we can see how these artists really capture these qualities of the archetypal combinations that they're born with. So, okay, so Bob Marley, Willie Nelson, Snoop Dogg. So there's probably no other three musicians that I can think of, at least, that are more associated with smoking marijuana than those three. All born with Jupiter Neptune combination. And I'm not here dictating whether the habitual smoking of marijuana is a good thing or a bad thing. It's just worth noting the tendency of these three Jupiter Neptune individuals to go towards getting. So at the same time, Bob Marley is known for capturing some of the most sublimely positive traits of the Jupiter Neptune combination. Think of how many songs he has in which he shares the positive and uplifting messages about life. Actually, I ate at a restaurant one time that had like a screen in which concert footage of Bob Marley was playing. And I was just shocked by how many of his songs have just such a positive and uplifting message, like how many of them. It was truly awesome. So in his words, "Rise up this morning, smile with the rising sun. Three little birds pitch by my doorstep, singing sweet songs of melodies pure and true, saying, this is my message to you. Don't worry about a thing, because every little thing is going to be all right." And also, he sings, "In this life, in this oh sweet life, we're coming in from the cold." And he sings, "The sun is shining, the weather is sweet, makes you want to move your dancing feet. To the rescue, here I am." And finally, "All I ever have his redemption songs. And you can even in his just his mystique is this Caribbean, like warm waters. That's a kind of a Jupiter Neptune quality there. It's like this warmth, the benevolence of the warm, welcoming waters, Neptune. So I feel this brings us to some of the strengths of Jupiter Neptune. Another musician named Isaac Brock, who's the frontman of the band Modest Mouse, also born with Jupiter Neptune, he expresses this in his song called Float On. He says, I backed my car into a cop car the other day. Well, he just drove off. Sometimes life's okay. I ran my mouth off a bit too much. But what did I say? Well, you just laughed it off. It was all okay. A fake Jamaican took every last dime with that scam. It was worth it just to learn some sleight of hand. Bad news comes. Don't you worry even when it lands. Good news will work its way to all them plans. We both got fired on exactly the same day. Well, we'll float on. Good news is on the way. Bring it on. Here we are, win or lose, win or lose. I can't say. We'll all float on. We'll all float on. We'll all float on. Okay. And that sense of floating, it kind of combines the Neptunian uplift and optimism. Oh, sorry, the Jupiterian uplift and optimism with the Neptunian kind of dreams. Then, of course, there is the iconically Jupiter Neptune song by Louis Armstrong, born with Jupiter Neptune. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright, blessed days, the dark, sacred nights. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Another musician who was born with Jupiter Neptune is Erykah Badu. And here's a quote from her. She says, I consider my musical ability to be a gift from the Creator. It's a gift. It was given to me, and I appreciate it. And I'm just going to close out this portion of the exploration of the Jupiter-Saturn-Neptune combination by pointing out how these last few examples point towards perhaps one of the most noble strengths of the Jupiter-Neptune combination, and that is appreciation and gratitude, not taking the grandeur of life and the gifts we have been given for granted. And really feeling true gratitude deep in our bones can be a sort of remedy for many of the problematic sides of both Jupiter Neptune and Saturn Neptune, both combinations. Yeah. How are we feeling out there? Good, good, good. We just went through a very expansive archetypal exploration right into the mainframe of reality to wrestle with some of the major broad strokes of, or you could say, building blocks of reality. So good. Good. All right. So we're going to wrap up this portion and begin to look at some of the transits that the US is going through, and then we'll open it up for some questions. But before we do, however, I just want to remind folks that I'm going to be leading a Q&A about the Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune alignment and how it'll be hitting your particular birth chart. You can come and show up and ask your questions, give your own birth data so we can pull up the charts and see how it's particularly hitting your birth chart. Again, I'm going to drop that link in the chat. I dropped it in the very beginning, but it might be hard to dig up now. So I'm going to drop that link here. You can sign up for that. That's March 20th, 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern. And then again, if you here we go. Yeah, so if you got your personal questions, put that on your calendar, sign up there. Also, during the most potent part of this transit in April, May, I'm going to be leading an archetypal astrology integration circle, which you can think of as an archetypal astrology support group. And with that, what you'll get is a full reading with myself, a full one-on-one reading, and then you have 8 group calls with the whole community that we create, in which we'll kind of support each other as we go through the transits week by week, looking at how they're landing in our lives, looking at what the charts are telling us, what the lessons are to be learned, so that we can kind of feel that even with the challenges of this transit, that the universe, as it were, the cosmos, as it were, is giving us a cheat sheet. It's giving us a map. It's helping us understand where it's all going, so we can dance with this archetypal combination and not feel that it's stepping on our toes. Plus, it's going to be super fun, great community. It's going to be a chance to connect and just kind of experience what we talked about of an opportunity to go within our own heart and experience how we are the archetypal person. And when we look out from our eyes, we all of humanity, we are all of humanity. When we look out from our eyes, we're seeing ourselves. We get to connect with each other in that way. All right, so I'm going to drop that link in the chat one more time here. Paradigm shift integration circle. You also, in signing up for that, you're also going to get lifetime access to my fundamentals course, which is a pre-recorded course. If you want to start your own archetypal astrology, to that, you can start it from the beginning level all the way up to the professional of that course. So that's included there. And then I'm also going to put one more. And if you're watching the recording, just look in the description and you'll find these links. I'm also going to drop one more link in here, which is kind of a fun one. It's just, if you want to know what tense alignments you were born with, and you want to see a list of famous people that were born with those alignments and how it showed up in their life and work, and understand a bit about those tense alignments you were born with, what they reveal about your life, you can just click on that link there and enter your birth data, and you'll be emailed that report, and it's super fun. All right. So why don't we just, I'm gonna take a second here to like share my screen. I'm gonna pull up the chart of the US, the transits. That's gonna take me a minute or two. Why don't we use that time to just kind of shake it out, shake off the, get up, do whatever you need to do, take a brief break, and it'll give us an opportunity to kind of let the archetypal intensity of that exploration that we just engaged in dissipate a little bit, so that we can kind of join together in looking at the transits of the US and also in discussion format. So go ahead and do your thing, and in about a couple minutes, I'll be all set here with everything, screen shared. Well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dive in here with our exploration, and we're not going to share the screen at the moment. And in fact, even before we get into the transits to the United States, let's just see if anybody has any questions specifically about what we just talked about the Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune alignment. Yeah, let's look at that and see if any questions pop up about that. And when we do that, why don't we actually, I can see one question already here. I have a super basic question to ask whether it's appropriate about how square force us to act if they do. I understand it's a tension, but is it correct to say we're being invited to bring it all together? So due to difficulty, we hopefully learn to integrate things that seem to be at odds with each other or in tension with each other. Yes, definitely. I mean, yes, that's kind of the name of the game. To some extent, we could say that that's the name of the game. Yes, the archetypes come into tension to kind of the tense aspects, which means the tense angles means that they're really in our face, like they kind of exacerbate each other to such an extent that they're in our face that we're forced to have to step up, try to reconcile these tensions. And that's true whether we're talking about the tensions you were born with in your birth chart or the transits you're experiencing at a certain window of time, or what's called the world transits. The world transits is what we're all experiencing. That's what we've been talking about today is the world transit, what we're all experiencing. That's like an invitation for the world to have to step up, to figure out, to figure it out. Okay, so yeah, why don't we go with hands? I see Iva or Eva.
Eva, thank you.
Eva. Hi.
Thank you, James, for doing this talk, and thank you for your contributions with archetypal astrology. I'm in Ren's class, and he mentions you from time to time, and it's great. My question is, with the triad we're talking about with Neptune, Jupiter, and Saturn, is Neptune the strongest archetype in this triad, and would Neptune override kind of the rest of the energies in a general sense, or it's kind of, you can't really predict that? I'm just wondering about that.
It's a good question. Well, you can say that Neptune is the most transpersonal of the archetypes involved, in the sense that you can look at archetypal astrology, you can look at astrology as a practice of looking to the sky as a reflection of the inner space. So we're looking at outer space as a reflection of inner space. So when we look up at the sky, outer space, the most readily seeable celestial bodies are the sun and the moon. We see those most every day. And so they reflect the sides of ourselves, of our inner space, that are most readily witnessable. The sun is, for instance, like associated with our identity, like the words I and me and my name. And that's why when people say, I am a Leo or I am a Scorpio, it's because the sun was in those signs. So that's why they say, I am, I am that, I am this. So those reflect parts of ourselves that are very much towards the surface. But when we start getting further and further away and looking at archetypes that are further away, we get to a point where we can't see them with the naked eye, like the beyond Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. We need a telescope to be able to see them. And similarly, they reflect depths within ourselves that we need some type of like spiritual practice or something to allow us to see to that depths inside ourselves, to those depths inside ourselves. And they're called the transpersonal planets because they reflect the depths inside ourselves that are transcendent to the personal. So like the sun, we just talked about the sense of I, me, my identity, just like the sun is the center of the solar system. The solar system is organized around the hub of the sun. We organize our life around the hub of like a personal identity, I, me. But when we get to the depth inside us that the transpersonal planets represent, we're coming to the point inside us where we connect to the whole. It's transcendent of the personal. It's reflective of the connecting to the collective, transcending the personal. So Neptune is the most transpersonal of those planets. So that points in a direction that I was alluding to, that, some of the strengths there can be from transcending the personal, not like an escapist sense, but in a sense of like, that I can become wrapped up in the story of the personal me, or I can see how the story of the personal me, everybody has a story of a personal me. The details are different, but everybody has it. So the story of the personal me can actually be a connection point to being able to identify with all people. So it can be like transcendent to the personal. So in that way, I feel like we can get the lessons of this transit. We can get that lesson at least. But they each hold good lessons. Like, Saturn has a lesson for us to actually stay with reality and not get too carried away into a Neptunian dream or into a Jupiterian optimism. Like stay with practical necessities of reality. But then also Jupiter can give us a buoyant sense that there is a benevolence behind it all. There is a there is something to be grateful for. There is something to feel positive about. So that's, they all have something to contribute. What we don't want to do is end up on the other side of these archetypal combinations in which we are kind of possessed by them and they start showing up in their misbehaving sides, which would be Neptune Saturn as like escaping from reality, or Neptune Saturn being as delusionally seeing things as more worse than they are, and then Jupiter Neptune kind of delusionally seeing things as better than they are. That's it's kind of like a razor's edge to walk here, is to like it can be a little bit of like like on one side a manic just feeling of like overly optimistic, and then another side is kind of like overly pessimistic. um those are some of the challenges that we're gonna have to navigate. How does that feel? Does that feel like it addresses some of what you're thinking? Yeah, thumbs up.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Any other questions about specifically about the Jupiter Saturn Neptune we were talking about? You can just raise your hand. Um,
Hi,
wow.
Hi, James. Hi,
Hi,
James. It's Barbie.
Barbara. Barbie.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey, I just came a few minutes later, so I didn't feel hear the beginning. What's the constellation in the moment? What are we
It's
talking
Jupiter,
about?
Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune. So Saturn, Neptune conjoin square Jupiter.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Cool. We do have a question here in the chat from uh, the philosopher of repute, Todd Desmond, who's quite an impressive thinker of our time, if I do say so myself. Okay, so he says, what do you think of this reasoning? Jupiter expands and Saturn, Neptune dissolve structures in the water like Hurricane Katrina. A Jupiter, uh, a Jupiter square Saturn Neptune conjunction sounds like a, see the rest of it here. Sounds like a recipe for some flooding type of catastrophe. There is that possibility. I mean, very common with even just with Saturn Neptune, the water issues are like totally very prevalent. I mean, the opposition wasn't just Katrina. There was that tsunami, in Thailand, and I don't know if you guys remember that. Just like the heavy realities of water, that literal heavy weight. That's like Saturnian heavy realities and the heavy weight of the Neptunian body of water. We just have in the news now that there's Saturn is also one of the heavy realities associated with Saturn is kind of like a pollution. Saturn traditionally was associated with the metal lead, and this is kind of like this association with Saturn can be associated with heavy realities like pollution. And there was just this really intense spill of chemicals on the ocean in just the past couple of days. And so things like that, it's kind of like heavy realities around Neptune, around the water. So yes, Todd. Okay, so Art says Saturn real, Neptune ideal. Yeah, that's right. Neptune is the ideal that we strive for, and Saturn's the reality. So how long does the Saturn Neptune conjunction last again? It lasts for quite some time. It lasts into, I think, the beginning of 2027, is it? And it's really tight through much of this year and the beginning of next year. But this spring is like there's actually a full moon eclipse happening on it in just a couple days. It's really tightening up now. So this is the first real crunch time. So Art is offering some good descriptions here to help people understand Saturn and Neptune. And I'll just say about the charts, about the United States chart, I'm actually just going to bring up, I'm just going to kind of describe it because I'm having trouble sharing this image on the screen. But before I do that, before I jump into that, any last questions about the Saturn Neptune? Because I don't want you to miss the opportunity to ask your questions. No? Okay. So yeah, so the United States, the Saturn Neptune, it's very interesting. The Saturn Neptune alignment lines up on the United States Neptune, and it's pretty interesting because it's actually the Jupiter Saturn Neptune lining up on the United States Neptune, such that Saturn is opposing the United States Neptune right now. And then as it moves tighter into the conjunction with Neptune, it goes off the United States Neptune and it becomes the world transit Saturn Neptune. And then in the fall, it goes back and it goes back onto the United States Neptune. And then Jupiter will be there as well over the summer. So it's interesting because, you know, for when a Saturn Neptune transit happens for a country, it can be pretty heavy. I mean, we talked all about the Saturn Neptune combination. You're pretty familiar with it now. It can be a very heavy time, a very kind of a feeling of like it's kind of demoralizing and feeling of the hopes and the dreams. You know, the hopes and the dreams aren't really shattered, but it sure can feel like it. And then the Saturn Neptune moves a little bit off of it widens a bit on the United States Neptune, and it goes into the really tight conjunction with Saturn with Neptune in the sky for the world transit. So then it's the world's turn to really sit with that Saturn Neptune energy, and then it comes back onto the United States. So for the United States, the kind of tougher periods are actually the spring and the fall, because that's when Saturn's opposite the United States Neptune. For the world, the tougher parts are really like you could say the end of the spring and the summer. So that's kind of interesting there. Also, the United States is going through its Pluto return, and that is something that a whole talk could be given on that. But essentially, Pluto is associated with the third stage of birth, which we didn't talk about yet, which is when the baby's getting pushed through the birth canal. And when the baby's getting pushed through the birth canal, and there's kind of a very real fight for life. You know, life is wanting to get birth, but kind of ironically and paradoxically, it rides the razor's edge of death, right, as it's trying to get born. It's got to go through this gauntlet. And that third basic perinatal matrix, when the baby's going through the birth canal, is like the struggle for life and death. And it's really the head is actually getting compressed. And the sense there is the kind of unconscious memory there is like an unclear sense of oppressors and oppressed, the oppressors and the oppressed. So when a mother is giving birth to a child, who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed? You know, the mother is applying pressure on the child's head as the baby's getting born, but the baby's head is also applying pressure on the mother. So who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed? The baby doesn't know. It's constellating that there's kind of this confusing struggle between the oppressor and the oppressed. And because the head is getting pressed, there's this kind of activation of the mind's capacity to want to think. You know, the body can't really do anything, but the mind can just rev into overdrive. And so when people are reliving memories of that period, there can be like this real heightened activation of the conspiracy faculty of the imagination of the brain, because it doesn't really know. It's just there's a kind of this hidden, murky, unclear oppressor and oppressed. Who's doing the oppressing? Who's the oppressed? What exactly is happening? And the mind just kind of kicks into gear and goes down these rabbit holes of spinning its gears because it can't do anything else, just revving up its brain and just imagining these just intensely magnetic and obsessive kind of conspiracy types of visions. And so anyways, the United States has been going through its Pluto return for quite some time now. We don't really know the orb because the astrologers, it doesn't seem like they've really studied systematically the transits to nations such that the orbs are known with transits. But if we give like a 10-degree orb, that's a long transit. That's a long time that this has been going on for the United States. Like, I don't know, maybe it takes a decade for it, or over a decade for it to travel that entire orb. And so that's a long period. But anyway, so there's that energy there too. This kind of like this intense, this intense kind of who's plotting, who's doing what, where's the plotting coming from? The Pluto return of the United States. United States is going through a Jupiter transit to its natal Uranus, which is usually a kind of a celebratory transit, a kind of a hopeful transit, which is more brief than the Saturn Neptune transit. So as that transit is winding down, the Saturn Neptune transit is going to be wrapping up. So a kind of joyful, hooray, celebratory quality in the United States is going to be winding up as this kind of Saturn Neptune wrestling with reality and hopes and dreams dashed energy comes in. So those are some of the transits. We also had Mars stationing right on the United States Sun, right around the United States Sun and Mercury. And, we did have a kind of a very Mars aggressive interaction on the news recently that you may have all seen in the White House. It's kind of like, and also just generally aggressive stances of the United States towards other countries. Mars is in Greco-Roman mythology was the god of war. And so there's kind of like it's stationing right on the sun and the Mercury, and there's a lot of tough talk, and there's a lot of posturing, and a lot of kind of antagonistic energy out there. So anyway, so those are some of the transits to the United States chart. Any questions about those, or anybody remember any questions about the Saturn Neptune, Jupiter Saturn Neptune? And you can write it in the chat if you're feeling shy, or you can raise your hand and jump on the mic. All right. Have I stunned you into silence? All right, everyone. Well, hopefully, these archetypal reflections, you can take them with you and they can kind of begin to land in a way that gives some context to the reality that we're all experiencing right now. Helpful context, helpful sense of the trajectory. What is life asking for us right now? Oh, I see a question.
James,
Yes.
What about Europe? What about Ukraine? Can you say anything about them at all?
I haven't looked at the chart actually, and I haven't looked at the chart for the nation of Ukraine, and I have not looked at the transits. So no, can you say anything?
No, it just occurred to me that we're very US centric with this, and I was just wondering about the rest of the world.
Yeah, it is US centric, not because I feel US centric, but just because of my lack of knowledge about the other countries. So I welcome anybody who does know to come forward and talk. I'm not trying to be US centric. I just don't know. There are astrologers out there who know a lot about Russia and its chart and transits. So, but they're not me.
James, what can we look at the charts now, just briefly? What's in this
Yeah,
moment
I'm
with
having
the
trouble sharing my screen, and also I wouldn't really know where to
ah?
go to pull up the chart for the Ukraine.
Mm.
What do you think?
I don't know. I haven't looked at it. I hoped you would. So I don't know. I don't have a clue, but there should be some really strong archetypes there. And Europe, the whole Europe. I'm from Slovenia, and it's like all is crazy.
Um,
I could just say a couple of things. I mean, I'm not an expert by any means at all, but I know that the Saturn Neptune conjunction, right, related to the breaking up of the Soviet Union and the wall falling down. And so we're at the closing part of that cycle, which happened in Capricorn. I can't remember. I think it's 1993, maybe it's 1991. But I did look at, I had heard just from listening to people talk that when Venus went retrograde in Capricorn, it seemed like there was a tie-in between that and Russia invading Ukraine. So they went into Crimea in 2014, and then in 2022 they went into where they're in now. And I was looking because I thought, oh, it's interesting. There's this Venus retrograde coming up, and it's kind of in a square just by sign in Aries to that previous Venus thing. And so I just looked to see like, oh, when was the last one? And it was happening in March and April of 2017. So I Googled what happened with Ukraine and Russia in 2017 in March and April. And on the day of the inferior conjunction of the Sun and Venus, which is March 24th, 2017, that is when Ukraine pulled their army out of their own area of Crimea, and then shortly thereafter, Russia took over. And I don't know if that's just coincidence or not, but I Googled that. So I'm waiting to see what's going to happen on March 22nd.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that the fall of the wall, and the fall of the USSR I think it was a Saturn Uranus Neptune conjunction. The Uranus is of note there, is like a kind of a freeing quality there. So it's like a kind of a fall of structures, but with a kind of a liberating quality to it there that we don't necessarily have right now. Although we do have actually a harmonious alignment between Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and that includes Saturn Neptune conjunction. So there's a gentle kind of inflection of that there.
I haven't brought the chart up, but Ukraine declared its independence on August the 24th in 1991. I don't know if that would be considered its birth time.
Yeah, that's actually that's that Uranus, Neptune, Saturn conjunction that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was around this. It must have been around the same time. So Andrew has a question.
Hey, so my question is about Jupiter's role when it comes to really any of the archetypes' interaction with any other archetypes, really. Jupiter tends to be associated with, when I look at all the other archetypes, I don't see planetary archetypes. I don't see that any are necessarily associated with positivity versus negativity, except for Jupiter has this sort of optimistic, seemingly positive type of connotation associated with the archetype. But I feel also that it would be wrong to say that, for example, Jupiter in conjunction with Saturn can only be a sort of positive feeling thing, even though the archetype does represent, you know, optimism on part of it, and that's not all of what Jupiter represents. I mean, Jupiter in conjunction with other archetypes can sort of result in something that can be uncomfortable too, right?
Sure.
Over the top, perhaps.
Yeah. What's that?
Perhaps over the top, expand to the, just make much whatever the other archetype energy. It's if it's in a hard aspect, it could just increase the intensity of the other archetype, perhaps.
Yeah. There's some things that you don't want to get big, you know, like you don't want all things to grow really big. Like you don't want an economic bubble that's going to collapse to grow really big. You don't want tumors to grow really big. You don't want, there was this, gosh, what was it? I think it was like a Mars and Jupiter. I'm not sure if I should say because I can't remember, but I think there was Jupiter as a part of it. There was this, some explosives I think in Beirut that got ignited, and there was just like such a huge, I mean, it was horrible. It was a huge explosion. It was just an accident. And Jupiter, that was kind of like this sense of grandeur there. So yeah,
Yes.
and then also like one of the challenging sides of in personal transits is Jupiter can result in fluff that eventually kind of makes us feel let down, because at the time it's kind of fluffy, but there's no substance. That can be one of the challenges.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, if anybody has any final burning questions, you can ask them, and we'll take them, and we'll begin to wind down. Anybody? No? All right. So thank you, everybody, for joining us here tonight. And I just, you can come next week and come and bring your questions about your personal charts, and we'll throw them up and we'll look at your transits. We'll talk about it. Put that in the chat. That's March 20th. If you're really going through it, or you know someone who is, we've got the Paradigm Shift Support Circle, or if you just want to kind of join with a band of investigators to continue this line of investigation, you can join us. Or if you know somebody who could benefit, the Paradigm Shift Support Circle starts in April. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this has been helpful, and I'm so glad to be with you all here. Look forward to connecting with you again.
Thanks, James.
All right. May it be a fruitful Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune conjunction for all. Good night, everybody.
Good night, James.
Good night.